Okay.
You got the notes.
Welcome everyone, and hello from Christy and me. Finally, we are together. We had the focus groups on this weekend, on the Saturday and the Sunday, so we want to bring everyone up to date to where we are right now, how the focus groups went, and of course everything leading up to the focus groups. Um, do you want to take over from there?
Yeah. So I think where we left off was we discussed the questions and we were discussing the recruitment, and I think those are the main two things because by that point, by the time we were in our last meeting, we'd sorted out the room, we'd sorted out the procedure for recruitment, and we were doing it. Although I think maybe you can talk a little bit more about what the recruitment actually involved, what we could do, and what we couldn't do, because we talked at some point about Amazon Turk, and that didn't work out. And so, yes, it was just a matter of getting here and getting to the room and setting everything up. So maybe we can talk a little bit first about the questions we ended up doing. I don't know if you can bring that up on Dropbox. And part of that was informed by one of our hopefully advisory board members for the 2015 study, Mark Shepard, who's who's an expert on social media and Scottish politics. So we've got the questions up. I've filled time. So do you want to go over, what we did for the questions?
Okay, so we thought of trying to get participants to talk about the referendum in a narrative arc. We wanted to start in a way where they started and find out where was the first time that they thought about they made up their mind about the campaign and about voting and the way that they wanted to vote, and perhaps what were the reasons for that. And then, of course, we wanted to also look at what their views were of the campaigns, if there were anything that stood out in their memory, both positive and negative. We wanted to tap into this idea, especially that was coming from some parts of the electorate, about media bias, particularly the BBC being biased, and we wanted to see whether our perception that it was perhaps one part of the electorate rather than the whole of the electorate, or different groups that were perceiving the BBC as biased or not. We wanted to get their impressions of the campaign that they supported and the campaign that they didn't support. And of course, we wanted, just like we have done with the 2010 QESB, we wanted to get a narrative about the day of the referendum, or in the case of the 2010 QESB, it was the day of the election. So when did they get up? When did they go to vote? What did they feel like while they were voting? Did they stay up for the results? And how did they feel when the results came out? We found that in the 2010 general election QESB, that narrative arc actually was very interesting to listen to and to analyze, and we wanted to create something like that for the referendum as well. The next part of the questions was looking at kind of taking their reflections on various things. So we wanted them to reflect on whether the referendum was positive or negative, either for Britain or for Scotland or for themselves. We wanted to see whether what they thought of Scotland going forward, especially with the 2015 QESB, the 2015 general elections, and especially whether they thought that there would be another referendum and how soon that might be. In addition to that, we had a few questions to set the scene and almost like an icebreaker. So we have been asking, Christy has been asking participants in the 2005 QSB and the 2010 QESB to talk about their first memories of politics. And so we asked, and it serves as a very nice icebreaker because it gets them into the mood of talking about politics without actually putting them on the spot too much, and not testing them too much. So this is what we asked our participants as well in all the focus groups. And we also did a leader's impression exercise, which we have done in the 2010 QESB with snapshots of the three main party leaders, as well as the party leader Nicola Sturgeon for Scotland, of the SNP obviously. And then we wanted something a little fun, and perhaps we can discuss how well or how badly that went. But we thought maybe we could ask them, given that it is just before Christmas, what they think Father Christmas should bring to David Cameron, Nick Clegg, and Ed Miliband. And we thought that maybe this kind of might add a little bit of fun and a little bit of also a little bit of insight into how they view these party leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was the questions, and then let's talk a bit maybe about the recruitment process and how that went. So in terms of the recruitment, we ended up. Well, it started for various administrative reasons quite late. Although, even though it did start late, she did an awesome job of actually getting enough people and working every morning and every night, checking emails and following up with people. So, actually, why don't I, now that I've introduced the topic of recruitment, why don't you go ahead and discuss how it worked, and also too, like maybe reflecting back, if we're thinking ahead to 2015, how much time should we have before each focus group to recruit people to make sure we have a sufficient number, and maybe too, how many people actually work in a group well.
Well, in terms of the recruitment, there were a few strategies methods, that we thought we could apply. One was Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which allows you to create a task and then it advertises that task to everyone who's on their database, and then these people can sign on to do the task, and it could be any task, and then you can choose among various people. So it's like a recruitment strategy. This didn't work because Amazon's Mechanical Turk is still not available in the UK, so it's only available in the US. If it were available in the UK, it would have been a fantastic way of getting a different slice of the population and making our focus groups a little bit more varied. Not that they weren't varied, but it would be another way of doing that. The other strategy that we had was sending out press releases. In our case, for various reasons, our press release didn't go out till about 3 days or 4 days before our recruitment, before the focus groups. That being said, once it went out, it actually generated a lot of buzz, and
But you
press.
can say why, yeah, because it was picked up
Yeah.
on the radio.
Yeah, it was picked up by a local Dundee radio station. And they asked me to do a pre-recorded interview, which I did, and then they played snippets of this interview on their news broadcast on the hour, every hour for the whole day. And so that actually gave us a very unexpected boost of both in terms of recruitment and in terms of visibility.
How many people do you think contacted you after the radio?
I'm not sure how many would have contacted me from the radio and how many would have got it through another source, but we did get quite a big, about 50 people in total, I would say. 40 to 50 people got back to us asking if they could participate in the focus group. So that alone, I think, was a good response.
Yeah, and considering how late we started, we would have liked 2 full weeks of recruitment, but considering...
We got about 4 days, I think, at the most, 4 or 5 days, which is not ideal at all.
But we managed to pull it out of our butts and get a decent sample, of a decent pool of potential participants to select people from in order to ensure some kind of diversity and variegated observations.
Yeah. The other 2 things that we did were I sent out an ad on the university's small ads mailing list, and that got me a few participants, potential participants as well. And then finally, I sent out another email to all my colleagues asking them if they were interested or if they knew people who were interested. And I had a few colleagues come back to me and saying that they either were interested or they knew people who were interested but couldn't participate because it was short notice, more or less. And then finally, our IT officer was absolutely amazing because at really, really short notice, she put together a web form which allowed us to advertise the focus group recruitment on Twitter, and advertise it in a way that actually people could just simply access the form with the click of a button rather than going through a very long process of trying to get to the form.
Yeah. There are occasionally cats trying to get into the room. So
yeah.
If you
Yeah.
hear rattling, that's the door. They're upset that they can't get in and climb on the stand that we're using to put the camera on to record this.
Yeah, the cat tree that we're using to record this.
Repurposed.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's about it for recruitment. We tried lots of different strategies, tried to get a good mix of participants, and actually we did manage to do that. There were some groups that were a little too homogeneous for my liking.
But we should also
But-
talk about the dimensions of Dundee and why.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
do you want to talk a little bit about how Dundee went in the referendum? And it's rather a unique place to be doing these focus groups.
Let me just get the exact figures though.
So I'm gonna hit the pause button, Christy. So while Edzia is looking at the exact numbers, let's explain and just remind people why it is we're in Dundee and doing it here. The university had a grant for a public engagement grant money available, and our idea of public engagement, just to remind everyone, was to do focus groups in the local community about the referendum from people who live in the community, and then do the analysis and turn that around and feed it back into a public presentation where it becomes sort of a moderated discourse about the referendum, but rather than it being politicians or anybody else up the front. I think a lot of people are used to the debate, which is a yes on one side and the no on the other, and a moderator trying to keep them from coming to fisticuffs. And for this one, it's going to be very different because we're going to take a distance view and look at patterns that both groups share, and also patterns that differentiate the groups. And one of our hopes for that is to try to give a more universal perspective, a wider perspective to people, and how all this kind of fits into the local community. So because Dundee was one of the cities that actually voted for yes, it's rather unique in that way, and it's going to be, I hope, a good contribution to the historical record of why independence was such a passionate topic and why people felt about so intensely about it. And if the transcripts, when we get them anonymized and the confidentiality requirement met, I think you'll see a lot of passion on the yes side in our group. So we had fewer no voters, but there was certainly a lot of commitment here in Dundee to the yes side. So let's just, what are the exact numbers?
So in Dundee, we had a voter turnout of about 79%. I think this overall Scottish voter turnout was 84%, if I remember correctly. 85%. Then, so of the 79% of people in Dundee who voted, 57.35% voted yes, and this was the highest proportion of people voting yes anywhere in Scotland. The next highest, of course, is Glasgow, and that was almost 54%.
There were a couple other places.
Yeah, and there was another, West Dunbartonshire, where it was also 54%. But in terms of cities, it was Dundee and Glasgow that voted yes by a big margin.
Yeah. That meant that in terms of our recruitment, we had quite a lot of yes people, and we were struggling to get no voters. But in the end, we managed to get probably not as big a pool as we would have liked, because you can always get more data, you can always use more data. And we are also we're going to be thinking about trying to find some way to do a focus group in the no area to try to up that if possible, if we could ever get a bit more money. But so that's just going to explain why we have two groups of yes voters and only one group of no voters, and then we have way more yes activists than no activists in our data set, and that's just a reflection of the local community. So.
One of the groups that we wanted to put together were people who decided less than 3 weeks before the election to vote either yes or no. We based on the questionnaire, on the form that people filled in, I thought that we had 5 late deciding yes voters and 1 late deciding no voter. But when they came to the focus group, it turned out that the person who said he had voted no had actually voted yes, which actually turned out fine, because that meant that we had a homogeneous group and no potential for actual arguments. And then the 2 people who said that they had decided late turned out not to have decided late at all. So we actually ended up with 4 rather than 6 late deciding voters, and of those, only 3 seemed to be really late deciding, whereas the other 3 seemed, although they said on the form that they had decided quite late, actually from the way that they were speaking, they didn't come across as if they had decided late at all.
Yeah, so I think in future when we do this again, we'll probably, when we confirm people's participation, ask, can we just confirm that you are a late deciding voter or whatever else? Because it might have just been people on the form meant to click one button and ended up clicking another, or they might have misread it or misunderstood the instructions. So I think it was a valuable lesson because the website recruitment tool was amazing, and we definitely want to take that forward to 2015. And also, I think we should probably develop a strategy where if we're going to be going to specific cities, to do local press releases to radio and TV that we're going to come in and do election-based research to raise the profile, because that is a nice way to both get exposure for the research and also to get a wider range of potential people who might be interested in participating. So, and the other thing too is, I was going to say something about the dynamics. Okay. Oh yes, really good idea to just have homogenous groups. So we only put yes people in groups and no people in groups.
We didn't mix them up, and I think my initial reaction when we decided to do it this way was maybe we should mix them up because we could get more data out of it. But I think given the current situation, given something like a referendum where, as you were saying earlier, when we was talking earlier, there is no middle ground. It's either yes or no, and therefore it's quite divisive. In this kind of a situation, having a homogeneous group of voters, and homogeneous in the sense of how they voted, is extremely important, because we had quite a few people who came to the focus group saying, right, where are the no voters?
Let's have a fight.
Let's have a fight. And that's exactly what we didn't want.
And I think the no voters were a little bit expecting that too. I don't want to say that, but because we had more yes people. We had more people kind of, up for that.
Up for that, yeah.
So, and that meant that, instead of getting the discourse, rehashing the debate, what we got instead was everybody knew that there was a yes voter or a no voter on the table, so they could just kind of let loose or give a more, less guarded, less social desirability bias. Although I think maybe there were some people who had really no care about social desirability and wouldn't have said anything. But yeah, so people were still very, very passionate about this issue on both sides. I should say, and there are, very deeply, I should say, we were both, I think we're both touched and are deeply respectful of the intense passion we observed in both the yes and the no groups. But yes, keeping them apart, I think in terms of data collection was much better because we were able to keep focused on what we were interested in, which is people's perceptions of the campaign, their election day memory, how they felt about it, and things like that. So going forward, it is something we're, with the recruitment for 2015, this time with marginality, we're going to be doing more with marginal constituencies and party, like conservative voters, Lib Dem voters, and maybe some UKIP voters if we get enough money. So yeah, we might it might be an interesting experiment to kind of look at the data quality in mixed groups versus uniform groups going forward. Yeah.
Do you want to? Is there anything else about the focus groups that you want to talk about?
I think.
How they went?
Okay. Yeah. Should we do a review?
Group by group? Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go group by group. So,
okay.
We got there early and had to set up the room. And the room set up, we wanted to make it conversational, but because we had them doing written exercises, we ended up at a table, but I don't think that felt too awkward or uncomfortable. We had set it up so the cameras were unobtrusive, and we also had 2 forms of audio recording, one on the table, one behind the moderator, because we swapped doing moderating, and so we got both sides of it, so we wanted to record everything. We also set out some food, which was a really good idea, some food and drinks, because people got tired. It's actually not that easy to sit around for an hour and a half and talk about stuff without being a little bit drained. So the food was a good idea. I think we just tried to make them as comfortable as possible. So in terms of the first group, were yes voters, but where there was any activists who had kind of there
There were activists in
Yeah.
there, yes. There was 2 or 3, I think.
Yeah, it was a very good group. A lot of really rich data. People also, it's we went a little bit on tangents, but I think we managed to keep them focused quite well. I'm trying to think if there's anything in the first group that really stands out, in terms of comments, but I can't. There, I think it was generally a very good group. It was one of the larger ones. It was 7.
It was the largest one, yeah.
8,
8.
and that was a bit much. I think 8 people who don't talk very much you could do, because you would get enough time to get people who don't talk to talk. But if you have 8 people who all like to talk, or 4 people out of 8 who like to talk, I can already see the transcripts where some of these people, it's going to be blocks and paragraphs of them going.
Yeah.
So I think for the 2015, 8 would be the max, on the assumption that 1 or 2 might drop out. And I think 6 is actually a bit better, because especially in 2015 we're going to have more questions to get through. So we'll need to be a bit, we were I think in this one quite loose in letting people go on a bit, just because there was when you first learned about politics question was really rich, and there were some really interesting stories that were coming out of it. And then some people, like I said, they would kind of say something really interesting and then go off on a tangent, and then come back and say something interesting. So part of the job of the moderator is waiting for that one kernel. Someone's going on and on and on and waiting for that one kernel that they're getting to. And then once they say that, and give them a little more space to follow it up, and then cut them off and then move on. So getting the feeling for, say the thing, I know you're going to answer the question. Come on, answer the question. But they were a very good group, very lively, and again, because they were all yes voters, they very quickly bonded, and they gelled very, very easily.
Yeah, and I don't think that they knew each other, so they were strangers, but because they had all voted yes, and some of them had experiences campaigning in either a lot or a little, or were aware of campaigners, I think that kind of also gelled them a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second group were late deciders and yes voters. And the yes voters in that group were very similar to the yes voters in the previous group. The 2 respondents who were the most interesting, it was a man and a woman, right? And I call them the diplomats. I really wish we could have gotten a few more like them, but with recruitment, we still have some really good rich data, but we got enough for 2 individuals who were saying similar things. And that was people who decided late, and therefore, because they hadn't picked one side or the other, were navigating the political minefield of independence for months leading up to the actual event, the election or the vote itself. And that was interesting, because they talked about how they had to basically withdraw and kind of go into a shell. I know one of the participants mentioned he just went off social media entirely for the 6 weeks leading up to the actual vote, and that he went on one day to just look at it, like right before the referendum, and went, no, I'm really glad I'm not engaged in any of this back and forth or posting and reposting. So that's data that we're more interested in and getting involved, getting into and unpacking a bit more. The other thing that we should say is that at the end of every group, once we'd paid them and they'd signed their forms, or we were coming to the end of it and we were wrapping things up, we all also had, Adzia would tell them, or usually you were doing the announcements, that if they would be willing to allow us to call them and follow up with more. So I think those 2 participants who were late deciders would certainly be on the top of our list for following up with and giving them a little more time and space to talk about how they navigated the referendum minefield, and more illustrations of how they handled that. And I think because it wasn't a fight back and forth where they were arguing, rehashing the same debates, but rather it was a situation where they kind of got a lot of stuff off their chest, and they heard other people saying the same things and could really recognize that. They were quite positive about their focus group experience, and quite, I think, happy that somebody was listening and taking down their stories and giving them the time to hear what they were going through. That made them, I think, more likely to offer us more time without any money, because we're out of money now for paying participants. But we've made a connection now with these people where they will hopefully provide us with a little bit more data so we can capture some of that missing stuff. And then we've also talked to all of them about doing focus groups in 2015, the idea of doing a panel and taking everybody forward. And there were a lot of nodding heads by the end of all of the groups to that idea. So.
And then the third group was the no voters.
Smaller.
Yeah, about 6, I would say.
Yeah, yes.
But the smallest of the 3 voting groups, let's put it that, if we can put it that way. And again, they were a slightly more reticent group compared to the yes voters, but I think the data that we got of them was also extremely rich. Yeah, I'm trying to think again, anything interesting
that jumped out. I can't. We'll talk a little bit more about like the yes voters and the no voters in a bit.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, for me, what was interesting about all the voters was that a lot of the voters had very emotional stories to tell, and it was not just the yes voters, also the no voters. We had quite a few teary eyes even, right? So I think getting those stories out when we do the analysis and we do the events would be very interesting.
Yes. I mean, if we can maybe just talk before we move to the activist groups a little bit about what we commented on after the group, which was how many times they actually, the yes and the no voters have very similar, not obviously deciding where they end up on opposite sides of the issue of independence, but how they got there was almost identical. There were some people who said, I started off on one side and then ended up going to the other. But more often we saw people saying, my instinct was X, but then I didn't want to follow my heart. I wanted to explore the issue and make sure I knew why I was voting the way that I did. And this is very, very unusual, especially having done the 2005 and the 2010. You do see in undecided voters in elections a desire or a push to find independent information. And those undecided voters are the ones who are going to go to, voting guides and websites and party manifestos and seek out that information on their own. What was interesting about this was that this was technically not about the parties. I mean, you did see no voters talking about, SNP, and you saw the yes people talking about Labour and the Conservatives coming up and trying to get, the no vote through. So people were obviously very highly aware of which parties were on which side of the issue, but they weren't going to the party websites to get the information. And I think this is an interesting aspect of the independence referendum, how people went about getting in their information. And the role of social media was huge. But I don't want to talk about that yet. What was I talking about?
The thing that we found in common across the groups.
Yes. So that the head and starting with the heart and then wanting to go in the head was quite common. Other things?
Prejudices about the other group.
Yeah. Both groups basically had the same prejudices against each other, which would be they don't know why they're voting the way they are. They can't give good answers.
And they're very aggressive.
They're very aggressive, and they're very ignorant. So it was just, that is the negative perception that both sides have of each other. Even though when we looked at it, what we saw from both sides was so much heartfelt passion and a dedication for what was best for Scotland. And so it was heartbreaking, I think, for us to see people who care so much about actually the same values.
And the same issues in many cases as well.
I mean, austerity came up so often, poverty came up so often, and righting the social wrongs. I mean, this is a very, sort of socialist area, and that commitment is quite common to all voters. They just have different ways of getting there. And so, it was, and we could see how this got very passionate because they actually are both fighting for the same things, the same values, and they care about Scotland as passionately as each other.
Yeah. So then, do you want to go to the yes activists and the no activists?
Yeah, there was another. Do you want to talk about the role of social media?
Yeah.
All right.
We are recording.
It's okay. We can edit this.
We are not live though.
Yeah, unless something funny happens, like a cat jumps up right in front of the camera, that's totally going in.
Well, we can stage that.
Flying cats.
We're leaving in about 10 to 15 minutes?
Yeah, 15 minutes.
Okay, so we'll do this and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah.
Okay, so social media. Whoa. Wow. Holy cow. I mean, in 2010, I've done, we asked people how the attention to the campaign, and people talked about going onto the news websites, doing voter guides, looking at party things. But wow, the role of social media dominated a lot of the conversations, and that is because I think because without the party structures to mediate and prepare that information, people ended up going to sites, and the sites that they went to depended a lot upon which side they were going to end up voting for. So do you want to talk about yes voters and their resources and what they rejected?
So the yes voters mentioned a few websites which served actually just like Huffington Post would, where you kind of collate a lot of material from multiple sources, and so it's all there at the, you don't have to kind of trawl through lots and lots and lots of websites. So they went to these websites which allowed them to access various materials and blog posts and opinions. A lot of people were a lot of people were very, very upset about the BBC.
Yes voters.
A lot of yes voters.
I don't hear one. I don't remember a single
no voter mentioning
any
problems with the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't mention any other news channel at all. Some yes voters mentioned cancelling their TV licenses because they were so upset with the BBC's bias, as they mentioned. And they also the thing that struck me from talking to especially the yes voters was how access to the internet and using social media and using internet-based resources was not dependent on age. And that is something that struck me, because I think the older you are, the harder it is, and the more you have to invest into learning a new skill and learning a new language and learning a new technology. And to see older yes voters embracing and using social media or using the internet in the same way as younger voters would was quite astounding.
There was a little bit of an age difference in that the older people, I know one talked about comments on newspapers, which obviously is a lower cost in terms of you don't have to sign up for Facebook or learn Twitter or figure out how it works on your phone, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, even searching online, I know another person, he listened to the radio, and I think that was his main source. But everyone else was really looking digitally for their information. Even people into their 70s were reported using, I think the guy said he read 7 newspapers a day, and he read all of the comments and got to know which posters were on which side and which ones he would read the comments, and the other ones he'd just skip over because he knew it was a waste of his time. And an older woman as well, saying her husband was on Facebook, and then for the start of the campaign, Facebook came up a lot. Twitter, not quite so much, but Facebook came up, I think, more often than Twitter did in the groups. And she ended up learning how to use Facebook and getting on Facebook in order to connect with other yes voters. So it was really, for us, it happened that this was a social media referendum. That's a huge source of people's information. And then maybe to wrap this up, we can, I'll say, one of the questions that we asked was how many people in the groups, like by a show of hands, thought that there would be another independence referendum.
And almost everyone across both the yes and the no voters felt that there would be a referendum, and many of them felt that it would be very soon. The yes voters obviously were quite optimistic, thinking that it would happen in the next year or even couple of years. The no voters were slightly less, but they felt that it would happen soon, so it wouldn't take 10 years for certain.
I think there were 2 people out of, we have 27 in the end? 2 people out of the 27 who didn't think that there would be another referendum.
And those were campaigners. Those were no campaigners.
They were the campaigners. No campaigners, yes. Which you can see why they wouldn't want to have to go through that again.
Yeah.
So perhaps that was it. That's okay. That was
my husband walking through.
Yeah, so we're going to go get lunch and then come back and discuss the activists and some other bits about how the focus groups went and where we're going to be taking the research in next year. All right, so our activist groups, we'll just do a summary of how those went. So the activist group was constructed like this. In the initial bid, we had asked for money for, oh, you know what, I'm a little bit crooked. I'm going to just adjust this bit. There you go. Yeah, better. We had enough money for, we were trying to get 25 paid participants on the voter side of things.
Oh God.
So there's just to explain all the movement, the cat just climbed up in the cat tree. So if you see a tail or anything like that, that's why.
Oh God, you better get that out.
So we didn't, but we also had the idea that since there were quite a lot of activists, so cat pause. Okay,
continue.
since there were quite a lot of activists, that perhaps people who took part in the campaign, who were very committed, very dedicated activists, would be willing to donate some time to give us their stories. So we had two waves of recruitment. One was a paid wave of recruitment, and the second one was a volunteer wave of recruitment. And we were actually pretty successful. We got some people were not able to make it, and of course, and unsurprisingly, volunteer participants have a higher dropout rate than paid participants. Not too surprising. But we just thought that anything we got in terms of activists who were willing to donate their time, that was going to be bonus evidence, because it wasn't really within the scope of the research design. We just would donate our time as experts to conduct the research so that we could get the data. And yeah, so then we had two groups. We had a yes group and a no group. We had more people in the yes group than the no group again. But it wasn't so far off this time. We had, what, 5 people?
5 yes and 3 no.
Yeah. Yes, and those were not that different from the voter group. But of course, one of the things we talked about with them was their activism and why they became active. And that was quite interesting, because people then talked about how they became sort of politically aware, became interested in the referendum, got inspired by it, felt like they should do more and get involved. And that was, I think, the data for that will be very useful and insightful as well. Anything else on the yes and no activists?
Not really. I think some of the narratives were very much in line with what you heard in the campaigns. But we did get other narratives that were not necessarily
Do you
in
want
line.
to expand on that a bit more?
So some activists kind of, both in this, well, I can't remember if it was just this group, but we definitely got people who were active and had participated as voters, saying that although they were active in the referendum campaign, they were not necessarily tied to a particular party.
Right.
And were definitely looking to see what the various parties were going to do in order to decide how they were going to behave as voters for the 2015 general election. And so in a way it was kind of reflecting what you were saying, which is the campaigners for the referendum were not always tied to particular parties, but were tied to a particular cause.
Yes. So, and I think other than that, most of the groups ran the full 90 minutes or a little bit over. We probably, for some of the chattier groups, could have easily gone 2 hours and people wouldn't have minded. Although someone had said, his meter was going, things like that. But generally, we had a really good response, got some really rich data, I think, real good stuff to work with going forward. Yeah. So that's a sum up of how it went, which was well.
And do we want to talk about what we're doing after the focus groups?
Yes, let's do that. You want to start?
Okay. Well, Christy has been cleaning up the data and...
Well, I can talk about that if you want.
Yeah.
I didn't know where you were going. I didn't know where you were going with it. So yeah, sorry to interrupt. The data processing and the data cleaning. So I think I mentioned earlier that we had up to 3 cameras. And it was good because some of the batteries quit on some of them, and other ones ran out of room. Actually, the most consistent camera is the one that we're recording this on, which is the crappiest one. But it also was, it's just very, very reliable. So we've used it to record this as well. And the next phase then is there's kind of 2 parts of it. One was to actually just go through and check to make sure that the files were working properly. We are going to be using as our core transcription database the audio files that were recorded right in the middle of the table. And then that will be augmented by the video, where we'll use the video to add context to the transcripts. We have also a second audio recording device in case somebody, we wanted to get basically a backup opportunity to rehear it from a slightly different angle in case that would help with the audio. So having collected all of the video and audio together, and what I've done in the last, what I did today was to take the audio from basically this little thing, I'll just show you, a little Olympus device that Edzia bought, and it's hot, and burning. It pops right into any USB port, and we just move the files over and we put them on, a shared space, service. Then I have gone through, and in order to improve the quality, to make sure we capture every word or even, stumble of people's comments, cleaned it up through a noise reduction and a dynamic range filter to remove the background hiss so that we can capture more of the natural sounds and what people were actually saying. So now that the whole files are cleaned up, what we'll be doing is listening through the entire audio itself and identifying those bits of data that we want to start to transcribe. So instead of getting someone in, at this point we don't have money in the budget to do transcription, so we're going to have to do really targeted transcription, identifying the data that we're going to be presenting. So I will clean up the audio files. I'll remove all of the fluff at the beginning. I mean, I'll still keep a version of that, because you can, if you've got permission to record and you just kind of leave the recorder running, a lot of times after the official end of the focus group, people will just keep talking, and you can still capture that as data. But you have to listen to it first. So I want to take out all of the unnecessary stuff at the front and back, and then chop it up question by question so that we'll have the same question answered in each of the groups as much as possible as they map on, because obviously the activist group was slightly different than the yes and no groups. But generally we ask the questions and consistently and in the same order in order to get the same data. That's the next phase of data preparation that I'll be doing as I travel back to Germany, and when I get back to Germany. We're going to then share this, we have a colleague that we want to partner up with, get him to sign off on confidentiality and anonymity, the same commitments we're making to protect people's privacy and their data privacy, and give him an opportunity to listen to some of the data and start to work on actually developing stuff for an academic paper, but also identify the things that we want to bring out for the public event, which is the next big task that is associated with this grant proposal. Mm-hmm. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, brilliant. So that kind of takes us on to the event. So we are thinking of having the event in the third week of February and the reason we chose the third week of February is because of my crazy schedule in the spring term, and also because it gives us a little bit more time to analyze the data and to arrange the logistics for the event, which brings us to the logistics.
Yes, because with it being the end of December, we basically, universities close during the sort of the winter break, and so by the time you guys get back on the 19th of January, so if we wait until the start of term to make arrangements and do the initial investigations and inquiries, we'll only have a month to advertise it and turn it around and organize it. So that means that there's no rest for the weary. We have to basically turn right around and start talking to people about dates and locations and start booking we're thinking the 21st of February for the Dundee event. Oh wow, this is
new.
Mm-hmm, this is very new. Sorry. I'm normally not sittable material. Normally
for this one.
Yeah, I'm more like scatter cause of running away.
So I have a list of things that we discussed when we met with our IT officer last week in relation to the Dundee event. So I don't know if you want me to go through them.
Yeah, let's go through them.
Okay. So there's a few things that we need to think about. One is to what the structure of the event will be, what the content of the event will be, who we want to call, invite in terms of hosting the event or participating on stage, for example. And then who do we want to invite to be in the audience?
Yeah.
And we have an idea that we want it to be participatory. We do not want talking heads kind of spouting.
Yeah, because it's a public engagement. That's the whole idea behind it.
Yeah. So, and then of course there's the room booking and those issues that we need to deal with. So maybe we can go through that way. We can go through the basic logistics, then the structure and the content,
Yeah, sounds good.
and then who do we call and how do we do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in terms of the logistics, I will in the next few days. This is a kind of a to-do list for me. Look into the booking of the room. I have an idea of which room I want, but I have been told that I need to check the cost, if there is any, of the booking of the room, and to make sure that the day doesn't clash with anything else that's on at the university. So I have to do that in the next few days. I need to sort out something called a risk assessment, which is a new thing that the university has brought in for health and safety reasons. So I need to look into what that means, when that needs to be done, what I need to fill in, whose permission I need to get.
Yeah, if they're on holiday, when they're coming back, how
Yeah.
many weeks in advance of the event do you need to get permission in order to book the room, yada, yada, yada.
Yep. I also need to sort out advertising or recruiting for the event, I guess, through Eventbrite, which is a software or a application, I guess, where you can schedule an event and get people to register for the event. So you have an idea of who's coming and how many are coming.
And all of our focus group participants, we notified them that there would be an event, and we asked them to tick a box if they wanted more information. I haven't looked it over, but there were a lot of nodding heads. People seemed quite open to the idea of being invited back to see what the results of their participation in the focus groups produced.
Mm-hmm. Once we have the date and once we have the location, I need to get in touch with a few people to advertise the event. So one is the press office. The other is somebody who was involved in the 5 million questions project at Dundee.
You want to say what that was?
The 5 million questions was so basically there's approximately 5 million people in Scotland, and as a runner-up to the referendum, the university was heavily involved in this project called 5 million questions, representing the 5 million people in Scotland, and the questions that they would have concerning the referendum. So it was a series of talks and activities that were on the referendum that the university hosted.
So we want to connect up with the people who are on that, because they probably have a lot of good contacts, having worked on that project for a really long time, of people who would be interested in coming and attending or even participating.
Yeah.
In some way.
And so I mean the next step is for us to think about how we would
Want that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And then again, in terms of recruitment, I will need to get in touch with various student societies and to see if they can help in any way in terms of either participating or recruiting. I'm told I need to check if Dundee have a match on the 21st.
Oh yeah,
A
football match.
Because if they have a match, nobody's going to come.
So or we have to schedule it, like the Sunday as opposed to the Saturday,
Yeah.
because we've been warned about not clashing with the footy. So. Oh, and then there's a big question that seems like a no-brainer, but actually becomes way more complicated. Is do we invite elected
Local.
officials to the event? And it seems like you would say, yes, of course you would want local officials to be at the event. You would want them on stage maybe to give a welcome or something else. But apparently, if we start to move into bringing very prominent politicians, that triggers a whole new set of bureaucratic forms that we have to fill out, and permission that we need to get, and then also an assessment afterwards, and a sign-off from another person. So even though it seems really obvious that we should have members of the Scottish Parliament around or other elected officials, in some ways we have to ask whether or not it's worth it to do all the extra paperwork, because how many more people is that really going to bring in? as opposed to inviting them or sending someone from their office to come and participate, and rather than actually like being on stage, which is unfortunate, but that's what we're dealing with. So. Yeah, and I think our general, when we talked about it, when we were planning, it's not like we said we were going to do this and we had no idea what the public event would look like. We had always intended to invite someone from Ipsos Mori, from the Edinburgh office of Ipsos Mori, to come in and talk about the polls and the polling data and how all of that, the story of the polls. We also want to work with Mark Shepherd, who's at Strathclyde, who's very much into social media. Again, in Scottish politics, he's become our real sort of collaborator on this. And perhaps that's and then another question that we have to ask is, how do we frame the question? How do we frame the content of the material? Because I know we both are quite committed to avoiding rehashing the referendum. It was clear that participants kind of on both sides came into the focus groups fully prepared to have a debate. And that changed, obviously, because we changed the norm of the conversation, because everybody agreed. There was no chance to really have arguments and everything else. But I don't think in February passions will be abated any more than they are now. And I know we both want something positive to come out of this public event, not for it to become more divisive. On the other hand, we don't want to be patronizing and putting up child barriers, and grown-ups can't have the conversation they want to have. So I think for us, having actually experienced the passions on both sides, we want to take that into consideration in terms of how we present the material, because as someone said, you do realize as soon as you put on anything about the referendum, you're going to put a big old target on your back and you're going to piss somebody off, which it might be inevitable just because some people will be offended by anything. But certainly our goal would be to put on something for the public as a public good that is meant to enhance the public discourse, add light, not heat, as it were, to this issue. So we have to figure out how to walk that fine line between presenting things accurately and realistically, but also with the norm of we don't want our research to divide people. We want to elevate people's understandings and maybe even help each side see the other side a little more sympathetically, ideally. See it from our point of view, which is you guys both care about Scotland so much, and you both did your research, and you both sides did this and both sides did that. They can't see it because they don't have a heart. They're not talking as much to each other. They're more debating. But we see it because we're on the outside looking in. All things that we'll have to
think about,
tiptoe around.
Yeah. I mean, I think the next thing is obviously to discuss the content.
Yes.
So, I don't know, how do you think we should go about it?
Well, if we have, so one of the things we talked a little bit about, but can maybe help us take this forward, is Edzia during her radio interview had an off the cuff. Can you describe the comment you made about?
I can't even remember what I said. I was asked why Dundee, and I think I kind of focused on the fact that of most places in Scotland, Dundee was Dundee was one of 3 places in Scotland that had a majority yes vote, and I kind of termed it as the city that said yes. And we were thinking maybe that's something that we could run with.
It's a nice angle for the research because Dundee is unique in that way, and that's one of the things we want to feed back to the community is its own uniqueness. And so we might do something like around that. And obviously for the no voters, it won't be so insulting because they won. So the fact that Dundee said yes, it's not. I don't think it would be too off-putting, but it might be something along the lines of. Dundee, the city that said yes, looking back at the referendum or something along those lines. But would be perhaps what we could do is the social media thing was huge. It was really big. A bit on the polling and the polling leading up to. So not just the 6 weeks, but sort of 2 years out. because it was the case that when the referendum was first announced, there was very small, like 30% support. It's quite low support, and it grew and grew and grew over time. And so I think that longer story of the rise of the yes vote, but just not, getting over the edge, would be a story that would be accurate but not inflammatory. And then if we did focus on the role of social media but not media bias, how this really was an internet-driven event, political event, and it would have been a completely different, without the internet. This wouldn't have been the same referendum. Without Twitter, without Facebook, it wouldn't have looked anything like it currently, like people were talking about. And Mark could perhaps help with that. And then maybe we can, in our focus group stuff, feedback in terms of the commonalities, areas of we found, and then also the different perspectives that, even though they have similar values, how they approach those values and why they end up on opposite sides of the event or the question. So those 1, 2, and 3s, and then the question, then the issue becomes, how do we get a participation? Is it just a Q&A, or how do we? Well, I'm handing it over to you now.
I mean, I'm thinking a lot of the questions that we are interested in have the potential of becoming inflammatory. I feel that the minute we start talking about the media,
But if we talk about social media, maybe the role of Twitter, Facebook, websites, and we could put media into websites, but not. But you're right. As soon as we get like the BBC, people will go on a rant. Yes, people will.
This is I think one thing that we need to think about is how do we structure the content in such a way that we are not ignoring the elephants in the room. Because there's more than one.
Yes, there's many.
But we are also addressing things that perhaps have not been spoken about in the past.
Right. Or things that people haven't. Pause.
Okay.
So elephants in the room.
So I think, like we were saying earlier, we need to kind of find a way of asking a question or a series of questions that allow us to identify things that are relevant but are not being spoken of, while not ignoring these things that have been spoken about. So, not giving people the impression that we don't want to talk about those things.
Right.
I don't know how to do that though. That's the thing.
Well, I think perhaps we can get some advice from other people, and also it might come in how we decide to do the Q&A session. So, if that audience participation bit might be, instead of, you could do a Q&A, but rather than, it would have to be about something from that night. And part of the participation could also be, sorry, it's not an earthquake, it's a cat. Another aspect of the research agenda is, it's called My Indie Ref Story. And Adzia had the great idea that at this public event, we could set up cameras with student volunteers and ask people about their memories of voting in the referendum. So, when did you decide to vote? Do you tell us a story about the day you voted? I'll just cut out that shaky bit where the cat jumped down. Tell us a bit about the day that you voted. What was it like? What time did you get to the polls? Were you nervous, or were you excited? Were you, whatever else? When did you find out the results? How did you feel about it? So perhaps the participation could be redirected into collecting those kinds of accounts, either with a recorder. Some people are weird about being videoed, but they might be willing to give an oral story rather than a video story. And that could be a form of participation that captures people's passion without bringing them into conflict. But perhaps Mark, who's done a lot on the referendum, might have good words of advice about ways that certain people have handled this issue well, events that handled it well, and events that handled it poorly. Because there is, we didn't touch upon it too much, but I guess we can just say that there is a lot of vitriol, a lot of anger, and a lot of division, passionate and real sort of like shutting down, not even listening to the other side, and accusations on both the yes and the no for various things. You know, the yes side is accused of bullying, the no side is accused of, you know, burning the Scottish flag and, you know, being really disrespectful. So we're very, very, very sensitive to those emotions are not too deep under the surface.
I think a lot of this will probably depend on us getting the right pitch,
Yeah.
or getting the right question,
Yeah, framing it correctly.
framing it correctly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think once we get the correct frame,
Mhm.
then we should be able to move forward.
I agree. If we, and hopefully being an academic event will also sort of take it out of the political realm, and it becomes less about debating a policy and more about analyzing. You know, and perhaps there also is an angle there about Scotland and the because that is one unifying theme is Scottish history and capturing Scottish history, and people were very happy someone was interested in capturing people's stories and the accounts and getting this down. So perhaps that would be part of it too. So yes, that means that in the next week I will start. We'll look at the football schedule. We'll start with a footy, and I would assume that means that if Dundee is playing football here, like a home game versus an away game, and if it's an away game, we can do it on a Saturday, and if it's a home game, we can look at doing it maybe on the Sunday, and then I can contact Roger at Ipsos Mori, and I can talk to Mark, and we can. I mean, because I do think that if we had, let's say, 90 minutes of content, the polls, the role of social media, and the summary of the focus groups will actually very easily fit 90 minutes without even putting any politician in there rattling on for 20 minutes. So. Yeah. Anything else? So the next phase after the Dundee event won't be then until the summer, where we have the Edinburgh event, and that would be post the election, post general election. So we can kind of punt when it comes to that. Okay. All right, so that's the qualitative stuff in terms of the focus groups, and we're going to move on now more towards our general qualitative agenda. So if you're interested only in how to organize and run and conduct qualitative research, I think this is pretty much, you can turn off the video now. But if you're just generally interested in how we're going about the project, we're going to, for our own sake, keep recording. But it might just be a little bit more casual now because the sangria hit. And I'm more chilled out. So we went out for lunch, and a really nice lunch, and a couple of glasses of sangria just to celebrate a successful data collection. So what do we have left? I've got specialist group.
Yeah, the specialist group. There's the Facebook and Twitter account, and how I think we should really think about how we do that and be a little more systematic in sorting that out. There's the devolution paper that we need to revise for PSA, and any other publication plans that we have, especially with the Scottish referendum.
With this data. Oh yeah, because we're gonna need to talk to your student about transcribing. Yeah, and getting bits of it transcribed.
Yeah, and then of course there's the QESB and the quick Kickstarter.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the specialist group.
Okay.
So I think it wouldn't be so much of a problem for us to come up with a pretty standard, the constitution and the forms, and submit it to PSA. I could probably get that done, before Christmas. It would give me something to do, during the day, on the day before the Christmas break, the Monday. So I can get going on that, and I'll just do a bog standard constitution with the typical officers that all the other specialist groups have. And we also, I think, just have to get a certain number of people, and all of the advisory board members, I would imagine, would be willing to sign up. Peter, Alan, and other people, and I know Liz Evans does qualitative research. There's probably a lot of qualitative researchers I could just contact and ask. But I don't know that we're going to be able to get going with anything until probably the autumn of 2015. Okay. But we could at least get like a website up and start to linking up to books on qualitative stuff or journals that are qual friendly, or start that low level stuff that we can do between now and April. But the first thing is just to get the group
Mm.
formed and official and get a constitution. So that can go on a Christie list.
Okay.
Facebook and Twitter, no time until the new year.
Mm.
Really. Or I mean it's up and they're out, but I'm not doing anything with them. And
There's a software called Buffer, which allows you to time and
set
not just set, but also you can, what is the word?
schedule.
Yeah, schedule and have a backlog kind of, on for Facebook and for Twitter. So you can kind of combine the accounts, or you can separate the accounts if you want to. So that might be
look into
easier.
that. Yes.
Yeah, I use it for my thing, so I'll already add.
Yeah. Check that
for the
out.
QESB.
Yeah, and once we get the event for the Scottish, we'll have something to tweet out, because we tweeted out a little bit about the recruitment, but obviously that's quite local to Dundee. Whereas this people, I guess one of the things we could ask about when we talk to the AV people about webcasting the event, whether or not we could webcast it. So, can we just punt social media stuff until early 2015? Okay, good.
Okay, so
Yes, discuss again in January.
then there's the devolution paper and the publication. Oh, there's this one, the website, which we didn't discuss on the webs.
Oh, is and which website is that?
So
the
the
QESB
QESB
website. Yeah. And the migration. But that also means that we'll need to have a talk about what we want the page to look like and how we want it to be organized. I'm wondering if we shouldn't do that in February when I come back. We set a meeting with the IT people, because we'll know if we've got the British Academy Leverhulme funding in that February. It will be 2 months before the first debate, so it should be enough time. I mean, I don't know if you want to meet with them earlier, but it might make sense for us to sit down, the three of us, and look at the research page and how it's organized and all of the stuff. Because now we can start to put all of the information, consent form, and everything from the Scottish element of the QESB up as well. So there'll be a 2010 site with all of the handouts and the resources, and then the Scottish the referendum one, and then the next phase would be doing the 2015. And
but I was just going to say that with the Scottish one of the things we have said we will do is we will contact participants and let them see their transcripts online and let us know if they would like to amend anything as part of the...
Well, we can't really let them see them online, but we would be able to extract their comments and give them to them. So, but we need to have it transcribed first. So once we get that... and perhaps the way to do that would be to send them the anonymized stuff with
She's eating your hair. That's a good thing. She loves you.
Do you love me? No, you're just hungry.
No.
You love me with your stomach, not your heart.
That's how cats love you.
But we would only need them to approve of the stuff that we were going to be using, rather than having them read through the full 90 minutes. So, or we could anonymize the transcripts and then send everybody saying, here is your alias. This is, you want to read through it and add any comments or clarify some things. But so that would have to happen circa January. I guess return of term time. It depends on how long it takes your student to do it, but I would imagine not till the middle to probably late part of January.
Yeah. Oh, look at this. Look at this.
It's on film?
Yeah. All Christy love.
I got little warm fuzzies now, furries on my lap. And also eyeing up my hair. You're tasty. Okay. Right. The devolution paper. Yeah.
That needs more work.
Yes. I mean, it was fine for the EPOP presentation, but that's actually going to be a bit of a robust, because it doesn't have any theoretical. Other than political sophistication, it's completely atheoretical. There's no lit review yet. I think the ideas that we have are quite good, and there's evidence for them, and people find them convincing.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of getting it into a form that our peers will accept in a journal article. How about this? This seems to be perhaps more reasonable when we talk about this, is working backwards. So we have basically the conference paper at PSA, and that's in April.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about the fact that we're going to be in the field doing field research in April and in May, in terms of the paper itself and sending it off to a journal, when do you think you would want us to do that? So
sometime next year. Okay. I don't know when.
You're in like the autumn part of next year?
If you're lucky, I think. Yeah, I'm
maybe more like
more
a year
later.
Yeah, wait a year. Because the rough is starting now. So it starts in January, and you have 4 years?
6 years.
Oh, 6 years.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a lot easier to manage then. Well, then we can be a bit more tactical because you need 3-star journals.
Yeah, 3+. Yeah.
3+, and the ones that don't meet the embargo. So we could kind of decide tactically where to place some of these things.
I mean, the first thing would be, and maybe as part of the specialist group, is to see actually which journals are more amenable to qualitative electoral research.
Yeah, agreed.
Because we don't want to waste our time sending things to places where we are going to get either desk rejected or they're going to send it to quants people who really don't care. Yeah.
It's okay. It's kind
Your
of
hair
fun.
is going to be all.
Oh, my hair's. I've got some to spare. It's okay. It just looks like a toy. I think that's why. As long as she doesn't use her claws. Yeah. So there are things like the qualitative report, but again we have to look at stars. So where can we get? Does your university or department produce a list? No, of course not. Why would they be so efficient as to provide?
But there is no such list in political science. There's journal impact factor.
That's it. Yeah, I don't even know what a 3-star is. Like how
I would think anything above 1 is good.
An impact factor of above 1. Yeah, this would be helpful if they were clarified. All right. So then, in terms of realistically, would we want to present at PSA pretty much what we presented at EPOP, perhaps with because we're going to be on the road together, a little bit of work on it beforehand, maybe a little bit of
But PSA is before that.
When is it, March?
March.
Can you use your internet?
It's end of March.
Okay.
Whereas we will not be on the road till April.
Okay, can you, let's just find out the dates.
I think it's the last weekend of March. Or last week of March.
Yeah, because I think I had asked for my Feldforschung starting from like the 19th of April.
30th March to 1st April.
Okay. Alright. Oh yeah, in Sheffield. Going down to Sheffield. Nick Clegg's constituency. I know because he mentioned it.
We went here. We didn't go to the town hall, but the registry is below the city, the town hall. And we went to the registry to get our wedding license. Sheffield. It's close to Chesterfield, right? Anyway.
I'm just worried about doing a really big commitment, considering that we're going to have to be putting on this event. You're going to have teaching. We're going to be gearing up and starting to freak out about the admin for the funding or for the organizing the payments and everything else. So I don't want to put too much on there. On the other hand, the devolution paper is quite interesting, and we got some attention from that democratic audit as well. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. But
yeah, and the thing is that there will be a limit to how much we can do once the general election comes around.
Yeah.
So we need to get this paper out
well, what do you mean out?
earlier than later for
What?
publication. So the more we push back.
Well, there's another option, which is to use the 2010 stuff as a baseline, and then collect data in 2015 and compare people's perception of the debates in 2 elections. So look at the leadership and devolution in Scotland before and after the referendum, perhaps, would be one option. And that way it would make sense for us. And also we might be more likely to get it published because people perhaps would say, well, 2010, that was 5 years ago. It's not really relevant anymore. But if we have that baseline of alienation and feeling like it was an English-only debate, and then we have people's reaction to the leaders' debates in after the referendum, then we would be able to see whether or not the BBC, and especially the BBC's reputation with yes voters, we'll have to ask people one of the screening questions I just realized for the focus groups.
Scotland, yeah.
Did you vote yes or no?
Well, then depends on whether we get our panel back.
Well, no, but even like any place in Scotland, we should probably ask if they voted in the referendum and did they vote yes or no. I don't think we should bring up the referendum in terms of like rehashing it. I mean, it'll come up in people's discussions, and we can ask if they're more involved in this election after the referendum and stuff. But that might be a nice way then to both procrastinate, but more importantly, to collect data that will be more time sensitive, and therefore a journal will be more likely to accept it. Because we had that problem with the Clegmania paper in terms of getting it knocked back 3 times, and then one of the reviewers was like, oh, this is a couple years old. Well, tell me about it. Like, not my fault.
Yeah.
It's not like I just got around to this. It's just been knocked back. So would you feel like that would be?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think that what we were thinking about.
Because we could compare the political sophistication too that we observe in 2010 versus 2015.
Yeah, I mean that's the only way that I can think that the paper will get published now.
Yeah.
Is if we combine it with the 2015 elections, because otherwise that will be 5 years
old. Yeah. And by the time it gets published, it'll be even older. Because it'll be 2015, and then it'll go through review, and it'll be 2016 before it. So at least that way, it'll be more recent, and we'll have half the paper done. And we'll know exactly what we wanted to say, and that's one of the problems of qualitative research. I mean, it's great because you have all these interesting things that come out of the data, but you don't always know what you're going to be writing on. You ask questions in order to get data, but what you actually end up, making the article about isn't always in your control. So that sounds like a good plan to me, and that's something that we could do, say, a preliminary one for EPOP, but then spend maybe a couple days before EPOP or after EPOP working together on the 2010 to 15 data and writing it up to send it out. Because I will come back in September for EPOP. Well, ideally we'll have a specialist group panel, and that might be one of the papers that we could get. So, sound like a plan?
Yeah.
All right, and then the Kickstarter. And I don't know that we have time right now to do that justice. I think maybe we should kick that to a Google Hangout when we have more time to look into Kickstarter and how it works. What are the tax implications? Is it just considered income, for instance? How does it all work? Because, we've talked about doing it as a charity, but we'll look at, maybe people who do these Kickstarter things just put it in their personal bank account and claim it as income at the end of the year. And if that would be the case, then we could get around the whole setting it up as a charity, and or at least in the first instance, and then maybe when we start to get book sales and other things, and we could have more of a financial basis to move that money over. But I'm just wondering if we should put that off because it's already going on. Is that slow? Is it 5:30?
4:30.
It's only 4:30? Oh, okay. Unless you want to talk, I didn't realize. I thought it was later than this.
I don't know how long I've been. I think we've been recording for half an hour.
I've got cats on me. Do you want me
I can't see.
It's kind of far away.
Yeah, I think it's probably not enough.
Maybe I'm just tired.
47.
Yeah, okay. It felt a bit longer, but not quite an hour. Or do you want to just have a general talk about Kickstarter now?
No, I think we probably need to do a little bit more research. So maybe let's just do the research first.
Yeah.
And then talk
because
about
it'll
it.
answer a lot of our questions right now. We're just like, can we do this? We don't know. Can we do this? We don't know.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that that's going to do it for this meeting. And if you stay to the end, you're a trooper. But otherwise, I think it's just going to be us reminding ourselves what we said. All right. Bye. Thanks, yes.
I'm covered in kittens. What is this? You're being surrounded by cats finally.
Well, I was kind of playing the policeman about in my room because both of them would jump up on the windowsill and start biting on the lights.
Yeah.
So that was when I pulled out my secret weapon of little puff of air, and then they would scatter. Well, this one faster than that one, but yes. I was real mean. I was trying to stop you from electrocuting yourself.
Oh.
Yeah, me.
Okay, just stop doing that on camera.
This is gonna go on the outtakes bit at the end of the video. If you make it to all the way to the end of the video, you get to watch us talk to the cats like they're babies.
Yeah.